Hey there, Python pioneers, and welcome to another video. This is going to be a special video where we talk about how to talk to websites using Python. There's a module that we want to use called requests, and I have it pulled up on the screen here. In the last two videos, we talked about how can you install third-party modules in Python. Well, Requests is a third-party module, and if you followed along in the last two videos, you should have it installed. But what is it? Well, if I scroll down here, this is on the documentation for the request module. Requests allows you to send HTTP requests extremely easily. Okay, if you don't know what that is, it probably sounds confusing. And so would the next sentence. There's no need to manually add query strings to your URLs or to form and encode your put and post data. But nowadays, just use the JSON method. Now you're probably more confused than you were before I read the first sentence. But here's an interesting bit of information about the request module. It's one of the most downloaded Python packages today, pulling in around 30 million downloads a week, according to GitHub, a place where a lot of code is stored. That's a lot of people downloading requests, and you're going to see why in this video. So basically what it allows you to do is talk to websites. So when you go in your web browser, like Google Chrome, or Microsoft Edge or Firefox, whatever you're using, when you navigate to a website, you're typing in the address of the website you want to go to, or you're searching on Google and clicking on a link to a website you want to go to. You are navigating to that URL and you're requesting the website, and you submit a GET request is what it's called, and your browser downloads the website and presents it to you in a nice way. Well, you can actually do that with code too, and you can tell Python to go download a website, which is what you do every time you visit a website in your browser, but just give you back the text from the website. It won't present it to you in this pretty view like what I'm looking at right now, but you'll have it in a form that you can actually navigate with your code and see what's on the website. Now, that's traditionally called web scraping, where you download a website that typically you would view with your eyes and then use code to kind of extract out the values you want from it. And again, that's called web scraping. I'm not really going to take you through web scraping because the issue with web scraping, most websites have what's called a robots.txt file, and it specifically describes who is allowed to scrape the website. And technically speaking, you could go out and scrape any website that you could normally access in a browser. So you could use code to download that website. But it's frowned upon to not honor the robots.txt file. So generally speaking, it's better to use an API to get data from the web. Okay? So wait a minute. Now we've got a new thing we're talking about, right? An API. So we're going to use the request module to make an API request. So we're still going to be talking to a website, kind of, but instead of getting back data that's presented in a browser, we're going to get back data specifically designed for code. And the chair phasing in and out of the background bothers me, but I really can't make it stop, so sorry. But the API is basically, it's a web browser version of getting data, but for your code is a way to look at it. And this illustration kind of shows that. So you have a client application, think of like your Python code. It performs an API request, so your code does that. And another machine in the cloud receives that API request. So just like a web server would receive your request and send back the web page, like when you go to google.com, what happens? You have a browser that makes a GET request. Google gets it and returns back the website. Well, an API request is the same thing, but now your code makes a GET request and the server you're talking to responds back with an API response. API stands for Application Programmable Interface. So it's essentially designed for code to interact with it. And let me show you what that might look like. So we're going to actually be working, oh, that was one I thought about showing you. We're going to be working with the National Weather Service API. So if you just Google National Weather Service API, you'll actually land on the website that talks about it. But I've already got some stuff in Mu, and we're going to take a look at it. So it's a free API. Not all APIs are free, but they are basically website owners saying, hey, programmers, I want to make data available to you so that you can access it with your code in a robust and scalable way. That means that it's designed for this. You know, web scraping is really kind of, it's just not very good, because if someone changes the website at all, your code breaks. APIs are designed to be much more robust and resistant to breaking. But you're looking at this data, you're probably thinking, this seems really confusing, but it's actually not too bad. So this is called the JSON format, and it's a data format for sending data over the web and just representing data. And generally you have these objects that are inside of curly braces, and you have key value pairs. So just like in Python, you have key value pairs. Well, in JSON, there's a key value pair of this is the key, and then the value comes after the colon. And it can be in square brackets, just like a normal array in Python. Your Python array is indexed with a square bracket. Well, you've got square brackets right here. And you don't have to have square brackets every time. You know, like version here, it's just got a value. So the key is version and the value is 1.1. And it seems kind of weird on how you're supposed to access this, but I'll show you. It's actually pretty straightforward in Python. But I wanted you to see what the data actually looks like when you make an API request. So see the difference? You know, like I hit this endpoint here, and it says api.weather.gov, and I'm giving it my latitude and longitude. And it's spitting back out JSON data. This doesn't look like something people are supposed to read, right? That's because it's designed for computers. And this is how the world runs. So I encourage you to try to find an API that interests you. There's lots of free ones out there. For example, if you're a Twitter user, Twitter has an API that you can use. So you can use your code to interface with Twitter. The weather API is an interesting one, though, and it's kind of relatable to everybody, so I figured I would go with the weather one. But let's look at the code for this. So I import requests, which is what we talked about at first. And there's a lot of things you can do with requests, but for now, we're going to just focus on the most simplest. Actually, I already need to, you're getting spoilers. Don't read that. Hopefully you didn't read it. Definitely don't rewind and pause, because that would be breaking the rules. No, but let me show you exactly how this works. So we import requests after we installed. If you run your code and it says requests module, no module name request found, that means you need to install requests. Go back to the last two videos and follow along there. If you run into an error, Google the error. This is part of being a programmer. You're going to constantly run into errors. You're going to run into things you've never seen before. And what makes a good programmer is not your ability to memorize every single thing. It's your ability to find the answer and know where to look. So I encourage you to, if you run into problems, try to troubleshoot the issue and resolve it. But we import requests just like we do on any module. And I'll try to make this a little bigger. There we go. And I've already collected a lat and long that I want to check the weather for. This happens to be Austin, Texas. You can go and find your own lat and longitude on Google if you want. Figure out what your lat and long are. There are actually modules for getting this as well, but just to keep this scope to a single API call and a single module, I've gone ahead and just got my lat and long. You could also add in code to get those things as well for you. Once you've got your lat and long, set those however you want. There's a URL you're going to try to visit. Now, https://API weather.gov points lat, long. Okay, well, that sounds really familiar. That's exactly what we're looking at right here. So that's what we're building in Python right now. We're building this URL. Hopefully you can see that all right in the recording. And we're building that URL just literally like you would a regular URL. And we're going to print it out. And then we're going to use request.get. The get is a class method. And so we don't have to create a request object. We just literally use request after importing it. And we say request.get and we give it that URL, just a string representing the URL. When you do that, your Python code is going to go out and actually download that website, which is so cool. I don't know, something about being able to interact with the internet with your code just gets me fired up. I love it. It's something that when I first started learning coding, it was just amazing to me. Like, wow, I'm not just printing numbers on a screen anymore or solving a math problem or whatever. I am actually interacting with the internet now. And this is where the power really comes in because there's APIs for almost everything. But let's just go through the weather API and let's see how it works. We use request.get. We got the website. Now, when this returns, it's going to give us all of this data. It's going to be returned. Okay? And I have to tell it, hey, get that response and give it to me in the JSON format, basically, because it doesn't necessarily know that it's formatted in JSON, and it should be, but you never know. So you have to tell it, hey, give me the JSON. It's JSON data. Like, look at the data you've got. It's in the JSON format. So now that you know that, use this function and make the data variable a representation of the response where it actually goes out and gets all the different objects and puts them in their place where you can access them instead of it just being like a raw string, for example. That how do you get values out of that string? But once you use the JSON function here, then or method, then you'll be able to actually extract data out of the return, which is super cool. So let's look at how that works. So data is a representation of the entire response, which we've been looking at on the browser. And to get data out of it, I'm putting in square brackets, just like I would on an array or a list. I say, or actually like a dictionary, I say properties. And then I say, okay, grid. So there's going to be some kind of key. We should be able to find a key in the data that's called properties. And then inside of that key, there should be another object with a key of grid ID. So let's look and see if we can find that. I see context as a key. And follow the curly braces. Right here, there's context, and it goes to here. There's properties. Okay, So the inside of properties, there's my first key we found, right? Properties. Now we're looking for grid ID. You come back over here. I'll try to make this bigger actually, so it's not so hard to strain your eyes. But we've got properties and then grid ID. Okay, so you can see how when you're reading this, you could download or you could hit it with your browser like this to see the data if you want. And then you could write your code to be like, okay, inside of properties, give me the relative location. So you just do square brackets relative location. And then you do square brackets again for type or geometry. Just keep going deeper and deeper, and you'll see that in a second. So that gets us the grid ID and takes that value. So in this case, the value EWX is going to be stored in grid ID. Grid X and grid Y look in the same place for the grid X and grid Y, which are just right here. So 158 and 90. And we're storing those in variables. We're extracting that out of the return that we got from their API. Now, we're doing this because the way that this API works, you have to hit this points URL first to get some data about the actual endpoint that we need to talk to get the weather forecast. So I tell them my lat and long, and then they're like, hey, based on that, go talk to grid X, grid Y with a grid ID, blah, 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 and you'll be able to get your forecast. And that's what we're doing. So once you have that data, the forecast URL, we're just building it based on the last return. You go to grid points, API weather gov grid points, and we're just using a format string to pass in grid ID, grid X, grid Y, and forecast. Now, if I run this code just to show you what the URLs look like, that's all we're doing right now at this point. I have the other code commented out. So we build this URL, which is the one we're looking at over here. And that URL returns this data and tells us, hey, this is who you need to go talk to get your weather forecast. And we figured that out right here with the grid ID X and Y. And we build that out. Actually, it's right here as well. So we actually could just get the forecast URL. But we already built it. So, but I didn't actually have to do this. I kind of made my life a little harder. But I think it's good to show you because you're able to see how you can extract different values out except just one. But the idea is I could have just put forecast here instead of grid ID. And in my forecast URL, I would already have it, properties and then forecast. But anyways, we built it with a format string. It'll work just fine. And then this is the forecast URL. So we built that, and all we did, that's right here. So this is the actual URL that we're going to hit next. And when we go here and we send a GET request to get this data from the National Weather Service, it's going to return back a bunch of data. Now again, we can go inside of the context, inside of here, and we can skip over all of these different keys, and you can get any data you want. So if you go inside of properties, you could look and get any one of the properties that you want. So like periods, it's going to tell you the way that they've done it. They have periods that represent like this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night. And then they just keep going through, but they call it periods. So if you want to get all the periods that are returned for the forecast, it would be properties periods. And that is a list object. That's how you can tell because of the square bracket. Okay, so if we look at our code, we can get the forecast with the request.get method again and providing the forecast URL. And again, we just take that response that's returned by the forecast get request and convert it into a JSON object that we can actually index into with keys, like we have been with properties. And then we can extract out, like, so we got city and state. Where is this coming from? So we got properties, relative location, properties, city. Let's look at that. Properties. Now let's look for relative location. I think it's further down. Where is it in here? Properties. Let's look for relative location. I don't know, I'm missing it somewhere in here. Relative location. Where are you? Properties. It's got to be like right here in my front of my face. Yeah. Let's see. Copy. I found this earlier so that you wouldn't have to watch me figure out their API on the fly. Let me pause. I figured it out. I was looking at the wrong one. So we're looking at two different APIs. That's the problem. So relative location comes from the first points endpoint that we're talking to. So inside of here, we've got relative location. So properties, relative location, and from your GPS coordinates, you can get, so properties, relative location, properties, you just keep following inside the curly braces, and then city, state. So we can get the city and state from the data returned. So this is the code. I think it would actually probably be better to take this and put it up here just because that's what confused me. So we're getting the city and state out of their return. So all we have to provide is the Latin long, and they're going to tell us, hey, this is in this city, it's in this state, and let's get the weather. So from that point, all we have to do is, we've got the response in the JSON format, and we know that all of the different weather forecasts are in the periods list, which we can see right here. So we're in properties, there's periods, and then each one of these, so it starts an object with the curly braces and it goes all the way to here. You can see number 1. And here's another object. Oh, I right clicked. So the curly brace separated by a comma each time, right? So each one of these is an object. And so like for this example, this one, it says this afternoon is the name, gives you a start time, end time, the temperature unit, so Fahrenheit, gives you all kinds of good stuff, wind speed. They give you actually a nice string already called detailed forecasts, and it kind of tells you everything in a string, so you don't have to string all this stuff together, which is pretty nice. But you have it all broken out in different variables if you needed it. Maybe you only wanted the temperature and the temperature unit, you don't want this whole string. So they give you options. Pretty nice. So how can we use this then? We know that in the properties periods object, there's a list of items. So we could loop through each one of these and get the detailed forecast and maybe the name. And we could combine that all together. Say this afternoon in Austin, Texas, it will be mostly sunny with a high near 83 and south wind around 15 miles an hour. Kind of cool. So let's see what that looks like with code. So to do that, we would just say, hey, for period in the forecast data properties periods, just using those square brackets to index in like you would with a dictionary, and using a for loop and using a format string. So for every period so every object in that list, print out the period name, which we know is like this afternoon, right here, name, this afternoon. And the word in, we're going to put in the city and the state that we got from the first API call we made, right there, will be, and then we just put period detailed forecast, which is just a string that's right here, detailed forecast. And if we run that, oh, that's my code from the other video. Okay, so now if we run this code, it spits out a ton of stuff. So if we scroll to the top, it's easy to read. Okay. So tonight in Austin, Texas, will be mostly cloudy with a low around 67, south wind 10 to 15 miles per hour with gusts as high as 20 miles per hour. Monday in Austin, Texas will be mostly cloudy with a high near 83. Look at that. So we are in real time getting the weather for Austin, Texas, and in a human readable format. Just to give you some ideas to spawn off from here. This is the most basic, we are working with API calls. We're getting data from the internet with our code. You could do so much. So I could take this string, for example, and I could feed that over to the OpenAI API and have it convert that into an audio file of AI reading that to me. So I could get this data from the weather, National Weather Service, feed it over to OpenAI API, and have it read it to me. And then I could have it kick that off every day at 8 o'clock in the morning or something, or 6 o'clock in the morning when you get up. It automatically gets the weather, reads it to you, and you can have it read exactly what you want. And maybe in another video, we'll dive into doing that as well. But this is a good little teaser into using requests and making API calls. It's the most basic level here. Just making an API call. You don't have a key you need to provide. We're just talking directly to a URL. If you start getting into a little bit more advanced API calls, you'll have to provide a key to basically prove who you are, because they're a little bit more locked down. But just to avoid some of those complexities for now, and just talk about the most simplest API calls you can make, we're using the National Weather Service for that reason. So you don't have to worry about all the complexities with the keys and everything. But just remember that web scraping should be limited and API calls are awesome. So when you're trying to think about how can I automate something that interacts with the web, try to find a way to do it with an API. It's going to be much more maintainable and much faster, and it's going to last a lot longer. So I hope you found that useful, and I'm excited to see what you are able to do. So if you build something where you're using requests to make an API call and you think it's cool, tell me about it in the comments. I'm happy to hear about it. Thanks.